There are phrases that, at first glance, may seem innocent, even sweet. But behind those words can hide manipulative intentions, a lack of emotional accountability, and a dangerous resistance to personal growth. And when a woman ignores these signs, she risks falling into relationships that drain her energy, cloud her judgment, and disconnect her from her inner power. Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychologist, spoke of the shadow unconscious, a deep part of the psyche where we bury the traits we deny in ourselves and often project onto others. In relationships, this is where toxic patterns tend to take root. That's why recognizing the words that reveal these behaviors early on is crucial to prevent long-term harm. In this video, I'll show you 5 phrases that, if you hear them from a man, should raise red flags. Because this isn't just about avoiding conflict, that would be superficial. It's about realizing that sometimes, behind a seemingly normal conversation, there's a psychological game being played, one that could cost you your emotional peace and self-mastery. Seneca once said, "It's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. And often, we waste it on people who don't deserve it." So pay close attention, because each of these phrases carries a deeper and more dangerous root. Ignoring them could lead you into a draining relationship where you lose your focus, your self-worth, and, most importantly, your connection to yourself. And believe me, no woman who respects herself, who has worked hard for her peace and discipline, should tolerate these dynamics. Stay with me until the end, because beyond helping you spot these phrases, I'll show you how to respond, with strength, emotional intelligence, and without losing your center. Let's begin. You have to accept me as I am. At first, it may sound like a statement of authenticity, even vulnerability. But be careful. When a man uses this line to justify harmful behavior, it becomes one of the most common and dangerous red flags. Carl Jung taught us that self-knowledge is the beginning of all wisdom. But he also made it clear, true growth begins when we stop making excuses and start integrating our shadows. When someone hides behind "that's just how I am" to avoid change, you're not dealing with someone authentic, you're dealing with someone who refuses to evolve. This phrase usually appears once you've already noticed troubling behavior, emotional manipulation, avoiding responsibility, or even passive-aggressive actions. And the worst part? When you try to talk about it, he plays the victim or blames you for trying to change him. But here's the truth. Accepting someone doesn't mean tolerating the unacceptable. True authenticity isn't about staying the same, it's about having the courage to grow. As Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic philosopher, said, "The perfection of character is to live each day as if it were your last, without laziness, without pretense." A conscious woman, one who's committed to her growth, shouldn't carry the burden of a man who refuses to grow. Being in a relationship like that is like rowing a boat alone while he won't even step in. Accepting this phrase without questioning it dooms you to a future of repeated excuses, broken promises, and a dynamic where you do all the emotional work. Remember, the Stoics also believed our environment shapes our development. And if the person you share your life with doesn't help you grow, they're only holding you back. So the next time you hear this phrase, don't be fooled by how deep it sounds. Ask yourself, is he really willing to look inward, or is this just a sophisticated excuse to avoid change? Because if his words hide a constant resistance to growth, a denial of responsibility, and a defensive attitude toward improvement, you're looking at a pattern that will only get worse over time. And that's where it gets serious. Accepting that phrase is only the beginning. After that, come other subtle but destructive behaviors. You'll slowly find yourself trapped in a dynamic where you're the one adjusting, sacrificing, and making space, while he stays exactly the same. Protecting your peace is not selfish, it's self-care. You're not here to save anyone. You're here to share your life with someone who also wants to grow, who recognizes their flaws, and has the courage to work on them, just like you do every day. Someone unwilling to change doesn't just stall their own growth, they also hold back yours. Stay true to your values and act with integrity, even when your emotions beg you to stay. Because what comes next is even more delicate. All my exes were crazy, toxic. When a man says this, it might initially sound like he's just venting about his past relationships. But don't be fooled. Behind those words lies a much darker pattern, a clear sign of victimhood, emotional immaturity, and projection. According to Stoic philosophy, real personal growth begins with honest self-examination. Epictetus made it clear, it's not events that disturb us, but our interpretation of them. So if a man always blames his exes for everything that went wrong, and never reflects on his own part in the conflicts, chances are he's avoiding facing his own reflection. This is where deep psychology comes into play. Carl Jung taught that what we don't make conscious ends up controlling us from the shadows. And often, men who speak poorly of all their exes are really projecting their own unresolved flaws. This phrase reveals a dangerous mindset, that of the chronic victim. People who keep repeating this narrative rarely take responsibility for their actions. Instead, they recycle blame, dramatize the past, and unconsciously expect you to become the only one who won't disappoint him. But beware, no one escapes their shadow unless they're willing to face it. The real question here is it truly possible that all of his exes were toxic? Or could it be that there's a pattern he refuses to acknowledge? A conscious woman, who knows her worth and has learned not to betray herself, must ask this question seriously. Jung said, "What we deny submits us." And being with someone who doesn't recognize their emotional responsibility is like building a house on sand. No matter how hard you try to create a healthy relationship, he'll keep acting out the same unconscious script. And the worst part? Sooner or later, the story he tells about his exes will be told about you. Because someone who needs to play the victim will always find a new person to blame. Being in such a relationship is like rowing a boat with a leak. No matter how much love you pour into it, it will always be sinking. This is where emotional discipline is essential. Look beyond the words. Ask yourself, has he ever spoken about what he did wrong in past relationships? Or is his story only about what was done to him? If he's never taken responsibility before, why would he now? Remember, it's not your role to be anyone's therapist. You are not here to patch up broken men who don't want to heal. You're here to share your journey with someone who walks beside you, not someone who drags you into theirs. And speaking of emotional manipulation, there's one phrase you need to recognize from the very beginning. Because while it might sound like a declaration of love, it's actually a very dangerous emotional trap. If you really loved me, you'd do what I ask. This is one of the most subtle, and most damaging, forms of emotional blackmail. At first glance, it might seem like a heartfelt request, a way of expressing needs. But if you look closer, what's really behind it is manipulative pressure, using your sense of love to gain control. The Stoics believed that true love cannot be imposed, it must be chosen. It should be built on freedom, mutual admiration, and respect, not guilt or coercion. Epictetus said, "No one can enslave you emotionally unless you allow it." And this phrase is designed precisely to turn affection into a tool of control. Carl Jung also spoke about this dynamic in terms of power. In his studies on the shadow, he pointed out how unbalanced relationships often begin when one person projects their insecurity and need for control under the mask of love. And phrases like this are a clear example. When a man says this to you, he's drawing an invisible line that conditions your affection. He's essentially saying, "Only if you do what I want are you worthy of my love." That's not love, it's emotional manipulation in disguise. An emotionally mature woman must have the clarity to distinguish between a healthy request and a demand in disguise. Because giving into this kind of phrase may seem like an act of love in the moment, but over time, you start losing parts of yourself, your authenticity, your boundaries, your personal power. And the most dangerous part is that the more you give, the more the demands grow. At first, it's just a test of love. Then, it becomes a routine of emotional submission. And eventually, you're no longer sure if you're acting out of love, or out of fear of losing him. These types of phrases don't build relationships, they slowly destroy them. So if you ever find yourself in a conversation where someone makes you feel guilty for setting boundaries, for defending your time, your voice, or your way of thinking, pause. You're dealing with someone who confuses love with possession. You are not here to please anyone at the cost of yourself. You are here to build a relationship where you can grow, express yourself, and be you, without conditions. When a man says, "If you really loved me, you'd do what I ask," he's not just questioning your feelings, he's attacking your character. This phrase doesn't seek understanding or connection. It seeks control. It's a masked attempt to override your will using guilt, erasing your personal boundaries in order to impose his own. Carl Jung said that real love is neither possessive nor manipulative, it is a conscious act of shared freedom. And Stoic philosophy reinforces this by teaching us that healthy love is not based on submission, but on mutual respect. If love becomes a tool for blackmail, then it's no longer love, it's power disguised as tenderness. Giving into this type of emotional blackmail not only erodes your self-discipline, it leaves deep wounds in your self-esteem. A woman who has worked on herself, who knows her worth, and who values her inner truth, must not betray what she knows is right just to avoid conflict. Because every time you give in against your will, you distance yourself further from who you truly are. And the most dangerous part is, if you allow it once, the tactic will be repeated. First, it's a small request. Then, a bigger demand. And one day, without realizing it, you're living according to someone else's desires instead of being the main character in your own life. The response, as any Stoic, or follower of Jung's teachings, would say, is simple yet powerful: stand firm in your center. Act according to your principles, not the fleeting desires of someone who doesn't respect your boundaries. Because someone who truly loves you doesn't need to guilt you into compliance. They listen to you, understand you, and even in disagreement, they respect you. It is far better to face an uncomfortable but honest conversation than to live day after day with the feeling that you've lost your emotional freedom. You don't need to offer endless explanations or justify your decisions in the face of guilt-tripping disguised as love. Because a wise woman understands that not all battles are worth fighting, and those that aim to break your will aren't even worth beginning. And speaking of emotional manipulation, there's a phrase even more corrosive, subtle, yet cruel: "You're not enough for me." Hearing these words from someone who claims to love you can be devastating. It's a phrase that doesn't just hurt, it attempts to dismantle your self-worth at its core. It's not just a criticism, it's a direct attack on your identity, your value, your essence. Carl Jung explained that many people project their inner dissatisfaction onto others, and this phrase is a pure projection. When a man tells you that you're not enough, he's not really talking about you. He's talking about his own emptiness, his distorted expectations, and his constant need for control. He's trying to make you feel small so that you become dependent on his validation. Stoic philosophy reminds us that our true worth doesn't depend on the judgments of others, but on our virtue, our actions, and our inner coherence. Marcus Aurelius said it clearly: "Do not let another man's soul rule over yours." And that's exactly what this phrase tries to do: rule you through insecurity. Someone who compares, belittles, or suggests that you're not enough is really trying to make you work harder, not out of love, but to earn their approval. And in that game, you will always lose, because the goalpost keeps moving. Today you're not enough for one reason, tomorrow for another, and eventually, you're left exhausted, questioning things you once knew with certainty. A conscious woman doesn't beg for affection or feel the need to prove her worth to anyone. You're not here to fit into someone else's ever-changing expectations. You're here to share your life with someone who values you as you are and inspires your growth, not your self-doubt. So if you ever hear this phrase, pause, breathe, and remember who you are. Don't fall into the trap of believing you need to be more for someone who fails to recognize everything you already are. That insecurity isn't yours, it's his. As Jung once said, you cannot make someone see your light if they are only searching for their shadows. And as any Stoic would say, your peace is worth more than any attempt to fit into someone else's mold. External validation is fleeting, unstable, and often self-serving. True confidence is born when a woman learns to validate herself, trust her intuition, and live in accordance with her own values. There is no greater mistake than letting someone, especially a man who uses your insecurities against you, define your worth. When a man says you're not enough for him, he's not being honest with you. He's projecting his own emptiness, inflated ego, and need for control. This phrase doesn't seek truth, it seeks to subject your mind and self-esteem to constant judgment. And spoiler, that judgment will always be unfair. Carl Jung explained that what we do not make conscious becomes our fate. And if you don't catch these kinds of comments early, you may find yourself trapped in a relationship where you're constantly trying to prove your worth. And in that struggle, you forget who you are. The Stoics also taught us that no external opinion has power over you unless you give it permission. Marcus Aurelius put it powerfully: do not let another's soul rule over yours. If a man insists on making you feel inadequate, the wisest choice isn't to stay and try to prove him wrong, it's to walk away with dignity and without hesitation. Not out of pride, but out of self-respect. Emotional discipline means not allowing empty words to destroy what you've worked so hard to build: your confidence, your clarity, your freedom. As Seneca said, the greatest power is self-mastery. And that mastery begins the moment you decide not to accept emotional crumbs disguised as constructive feedback. If you hear this phrase, take a deep breath, stand tall, and remember, the real problem is not in you. It's in his need to feel superior at the expense of your self-worth. Walk away knowing your value is not measured by anyone's standards, especially not by someone who can't see your greatness. And now we arrive at the last phrase, possibly the most dangerous of them all: do whatever you want, said with a passive-aggressive tone. If a man says this with irony, coldness, or resentment, he's not actually giving you freedom. What he's doing is setting an emotional trap, trying to make you feel guilty for making your own decisions. He's not relinquishing control, he's disguising manipulation as permission. Carl Jung spoke of the hidden ways people manipulate from their shadow. This phrase is a perfect example. He's not saying what he truly feels, he's not expressing what he thinks, but he expects you to guess. And if you don't? Then come the guilt, the drama, or the reproach. Stoic philosophy teaches that healthy relationships are built on clear and direct communication. Seneca summarized it perfectly: speak in a way that your words don't require interpretation. When someone speaks to you in riddles, with double meanings, they're not communicating, they're emotionally manipulating. These kinds of phrases place you in a constant state of uncertainty. You find yourself trying to interpret, to please, to avoid negative reactions, until you realize you're living according to their emotions, not your own. Bit by bit, your peace of mind starts to erode. A woman who has developed emotional intelligence should never play that game. The best response to a phrase like "do whatever you want" is literal action, so do it. Without fear, without unnecessary explanations, without falling into their emotional web. That single act breaks the cycle of manipulation and forces the other person to either grow up, be direct, or sit alone in their passive-aggressive silence. Because you're no longer available for emotional games. Both Carl Jung and the Stoics agree that living with clarity and authenticity is a path to true freedom. And that freedom begins the moment you stop reacting, and start choosing. Choosing your words, your boundaries, and who deserves your energy. Responding with clarity or walking away from a conversation laced with ambiguity isn't cold, it's emotional intelligence. It's a way to break the manipulative cycle and draw a clear line that says you won't allow anyone to toy with your emotions. The Stoic attitude toward these situations is simple and powerful: don't try to decode what someone doesn't have the courage to say directly. Ambiguity is a tool of control. And a conscious woman, just like a Stoic man, will always choose clarity, consistency, and inner freedom. Stay true to your decisions. Act with firmness. And never forget, a man who truly wants to be with you doesn't need to manipulate you, speak in codes, or provoke emotional confusion. Healthy love doesn't hide behind games, it shows up with transparency. Inner peace is built when your thoughts, your words, and your actions are in harmony. And as we've seen throughout this video, those phrases that might seem harmless at first are often very clear warning signs. Signs that, if not recognized in time, can lead you into relationships that drain your energy, your focus, and your very essence. Stoic philosophy and Carl Jung's deep psychology invite us to look beyond the words, to see the pattern, not just the moment. To protect our emotional stability with wisdom. Because it's not about judging others, it's about knowing when to walk away so you don't betray yourself.